For the first few months of last season, Tyrese Haliburton was one of the best guards in the entire NBA. That's not an overestimation, that's not an overreaction, it's fact. And he had propelled the Pacers to a much higher place in the Eastern Conference than anyone really thought that they belonged. And from that moment on, everything changed for the Pacers. They built their entire offense around Haliburton's incredible passing vision and instincts. They added a star alongside him by trading for Pascal Siakam at the trade deadline, and they made the conference finals. But if you look closely, Tyrese Haliburton has not even been close to the same player for basically a year now, and that is a huge problem not only for him, but the Pacers as well. So your first two questions are probably, one, is that actually happening? Has he actually fallen off that much, or is that just an overestimation? And two, if that's the case, why is this happening? If you look at his numbers from the first couple of months last season, pre-All-Star break, Tyrese Halburton was averaging like 22 and 12 with great shooting splits. He was running everything for the Pacers. He looked like this unstoppable force. He was hitting all these pull-up threes and all this stuff that we thought the peak of Tyrese Halburton could be, and maybe even beyond that. He absolutely was that. But then, after the All-Star break last year, all those numbers dropped significantly, including efficiency, including per-game numbers. And there's a couple of reasons for why things fell off for him. First of all, and most importantly, he had a hamstring injury in January of 2024, missed some time, but also it just completely altered who he was as a player the rest of the season. At no point after that hamstring injury in January did Tyrese Haliburton look like the same player that he was the first couple of months of the year. The other thing that happened was something that he always needed to have in order to be a top-level NBA player, and that's three-point shooting. And all of his three-point shooting numbers fell off a cliff after the All-Star break, after the injury last year, and of course that limited his scoring. There were times where he wasn't even trying to look at the rim, he wasn't even trying to score, and a lot of that was because of the drop-off of his three-point shooting. That was one of the issues for him as a prospect in the early part of his career with the Kings, was he had this weird shooting form. People weren't sure if it was going to translate to the NBA, if he was going to be able to be a good three-point shooter, and largely we just thought that that was solved for him at the beginning of last year, and it has become a significant issue ever since. If he's not hitting these kinds of pull-up threes, if he's not setting up his drives with the threat of a three-point shot, his entire offensive game, like a lot of other guards around the league, really starts to fall apart. And the other reason that his numbers fell off is something that makes complete sense. They traded for Pascal Siakam. They ran less of their offense through Tyrese Haliburton after trading for Siakam, which of course makes perfect sense because he was having to do too much for them anyway. And the concept of adding Siakam made total sense for them at the time. Adding a star alongside, yes, a very good player in Haliburton, but ultimately a complementary star, a guy that wants to create for other players. And Siakam was a perfect fit in Indiana. And after things fell off for him last year, and as we went into the season this year, the assumption was that the beginning of last year was just a hot streak. He was shooting the ball really well. His confidence was sky high. He was in this new role with the Pacers, and then the injury caused a lot of issues for him, as well as some of the other factors that we talked about. And that this year, he would settle somewhere in between the pre-All-Star version of himself last year and the post-All-Star version of himself last year. That was the assumption. The problem is, every single number, advanced number, eye test, everything you can compare Tyrese Haliburton to through the first 15 games of this season compared to at any point last year after the All-Star break, pre-All-Star break, it doesn't matter. He has been categorically worse, so much worse this season. His per-game numbers are down. His efficiency numbers are terrible. He's basically not a scoring threat at all. Sub 40% on field goals, sub 30% from three-point range, and he just does not look right. He does not look aggressive. That was an issue for him towards the end of the year last year as well, where he just wasn't trying to be a scoring threat on offense. Every single time that he drove, he was trying to kick the ball out. He wasn't trying to attack the rim. He wasn't really trying to get shots up at all. It was a confidence issue. And again, the assumption was he'll get healthy and he'll be much better this year. That hasn't happened. And accordingly, the Pacers have, throughout the season, moved more and more of their offense away from Tyrese Haliburton. His pick and roll numbers are down. His pick and roll volume is down. They're treating him like he is a worse player than he was last year, because that's exactly what's happening. They're running more stuff through Siakam. They're giving Miles Turner more opportunities. Some of the other guards, like Benedict Mathurin, are having such better seasons this year in terms of all-ball scoring numbers because they have the ball more. And all this is a massive issue for the Pacers because they largely built their team around Haliburton. If he didn't have that start to the year that he did last year, they probably don't make the Pascal Siakam trade, and of course they don't make the conference finals. Everything about their team is different if he doesn't have that start to the year that he did last year, and certainly everything about their team is going to be different if he isn't that guy moving forward. But the weirdest part of all of this is something that we really don't see very often anymore in the NBA, typically because of the amount of volume and shooting variance that we have in the league. Splits in terms of home and away are not really that different. But for Tyrese Haliburton, he has the most stark contrast home-away splits that I've honestly ever seen from a high-level NBA player. At home this year, he has been pretty close to what we expected him to be coming into the season. A middle ground between those pre and post All-Star numbers from last year, averaging 20 and 9, shooting well from the field, almost 40% from three. Those are games at home for Tyrese Haliburton. Granted, that's only a 6-game sample size out of 15, but still, those are the numbers. On the road, Tyrese Haliburton has been basically unplayable. 12 and 8, 30% field goal, 20% from three. If you're going to have a guy you consider to be a star, a focal point of your offense, going to have the ball a ton, and those are going to be his shooting splits, he basically is unplayable. There's so many other guys you could have on your roster put up much better numbers than that. And I don't know how to explain the home and away split difference for Tyrese Haliburton from a statistical perspective. There's no way to really explain it. There have been theories out there about the fact that he's still dealing with some injury stuff, whether it be the hamstring, he's had a back injury issue, and that maybe travel has caused his back injury issue to be that much more of a problem, and him not being able to sleep in his own bed at home. Like, that's been a real thing, a real theory that people have had, that he's so bad on the road because his back just doesn't feel right when they're having to travel. That might be the case, but that's not going to get any better at any point throughout the season. And it's clear to me that two things have happened with Tyrese Haliburton. One, the confidence level has dropped so much at this point from where he was pre-All-Star break last year that we're never getting that guy ever again. I don't think that's ever going to happen. I don't think that was even who Tyrese Haliburton was in the first place, who he was pre-All-Star break last year. But I also don't think that who he is on the road this year is who he is either. Again, he's probably going to settle somewhere in the middle. And the start that he had for the Pacers last year largely created a higher expectation in our minds of what Tyrese Haliburton should be at the NBA level than what we should have had. He was never that good of a player. I don't think he will ever be that good of a player, but he can still be very good, which brings me to the other thing that I think is happening. Tyrese Haliburton is not healthy. Like, there's just no way you can convince me with this dramatic of a difference in terms of his splits that this is a healthy basketball player. He's dealing with whatever this back issue is. Ever since he had the hamstring injury in January of 2024, he has been so much worse than at any point prior to that injury. And when that happens, when you can pinpoint a specific point in time and say, nothing has been the same since then, nothing even looks remotely close to how it was since this happened, that has to be a significant part of the reason. Now, with all that said, none of this helps Indiana. The fact that this is an injury issue or home away split issue, whatever it is, none of that helps them because they have built a team that largely is able to compete with some of the better teams in the Eastern Conference because they're well coached. They have this high-powered offense. They have Siakam and Turner in the front court. They have Haliburton in the backcourt. Mathurin has been awesome. But if they don't have a true star, all-star caliber guard in Tyrese Haliburton anymore, the entire structure of their team doesn't make any sense because then they're basically what the Raptors were when they traded away Pascal Siakam. They've got a really good, not quite all-NBA first or second team kind of guy. That's not necessarily who Pascal Siakam is, although he's very good. And then they've got a bunch of other guys that are pretty solid, but the ceiling on this team is so much more limited if this is the version of Tyrese Haliburton that they have. And in terms of solutions, there really aren't any. They can shelf Tyrese Haliburton for a couple of weeks, hope that he gets healthy, hope that he figures out this back issue, but they did that last year with the hamstring issue. They weren't very good when he wasn't playing, when he missed games with the hamstring, so he came back and then he was just never the same. And if it's truly a back issue, that's one of those things that's probably never really going to go away. It's always going to be something that's bothering him. And they obviously logistically need to figure some things out in terms of travel to get this guy to play better on the road. Because if it's because of his back issue and the travel and the impact that has on his injury, that's a logistical thing. They got to get that figured out. They got to find a way for him to be able to play well on the road. But regardless, this is a significant issue for him because he's just not even remotely close to the same guy. And until they get that figured out, until they can get him to look somewhere in between pre-post All-Star last year Tyrese Haliburton, there is a very, very hard ceiling on what this Pacers team can accomplish.